Welcome to the Business of Family, the podcast where we explore the stories, challenges, and opportunities of family businesses. I'm your host, Tammy Buss, and I'm a family business survivor, and I'm also a family business advisor. In this show, we'll be talking with family business leaders and experts to bring you insights and inspiration so you too can survive your family business journey. Whether you're a founder, a successor, a professional, or just curious about family business, this podcast is for you. So today's guest is Marty Britton. She is the second generation president and CEO of Britton Management Profile Inc., the first ever reference checking company in Canada, incorporated in 1974. Marty is an ambassador for the background checking industry. She took over the company from her father, the late David Britton, which we'll get into a little bit more, when the only service company offered at the time was executive reference checking. Marty has since added a wide range of pre-employment screening services to the list of product offerings, including criminal, credit, employment, education checks, and global sanctions, exit interviews, and more recently, social media and COVID-19 immunization tracking for organizations. So please welcome Marty to the podcast.
Thank you, Tammy, for that introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today.
Thank you. So I want to start at the very beginning, which is how you ended up as president, because it in your bio, it mentioned that you had taken over the company from your late father. So can you tell me a little bit about how you ended up being the president?
Absolutely, Tammy. Well, it wasn't something that was planned. It was never something, that was discussed in family dinners or what was going to happen. Before I took over Britton Management, I had a job. I refer to it as like I had a job. I was an employee of a company. I had taken civil engineering at school and I had loved the job that I had. Been working there for a very long period of time. And then I was on maternity leave with child number 2. And when I was on mat leave, my father became ill. And he ended up in intensive care for a while. Anyway, it was like somebody had to kind of step up and help out till he got better. And according to the family, because I was on mat leave, I had time. So yes, I could help out.
Of course you do.
So that's kind of how it started. It wasn't planned. It was just kind of thrown at me because of the circumstances of my situation at that time.
So is saying that it wasn't planned. So your dad had a business. Tell me a little bit about how the business evolved to the point of then when he passed. So it says it started in 1974. Tell me a little bit about the beginnings.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, unfortunately, he did recover for a bit, so I was able to get that information from him. But he started as an investigative reference checking company. What he did in those days, you could not do today. You would get sued. We would go out and we would find references. We're so litigious today,
Yes.
But we would go out to a company where someone used to work in the past, and we would just call them up out of the blue and ask to speak to someone who could give information on that employee.
Mm-hmm.
I
remember those days.
Yeah. Okay. So you get it, right? We could not do that, as I said today. But it was very basic. It was very raw. It was very real. People were not as litigious as they are today. People were willing to give information that they probably wouldn't give today. It was a great way to kind of start. I described it as an investigative reference checking because our clients didn't give us the references. We had to find those references on our own. So it was a lot of sleuthing, a lot of investigation. And, we didn't have the internet to do that sort of work.
Right. Yes.
Right. So it was a real job at that point.
And so how many kids are in your family?
There's myself and my older brother.
And so was your brother involved in the business at all?
No, never at all. He left Canada many decades ago and was relocated to the U.S. He has his own thing going on down in the U.S. So there was never any, interest at all in that. So it just kind of fell on me.
Right. And so, no interest, again, because I'm a family business advisor and we work with first to second gen, because that tends to be the cutoff point where only 30% of businesses transition. So we're trying to sort of help that number. But was it ever talked about that you or your brother, could come in, or what the opportunities were? Any of that? Were you did you really understand what your dad did?
No, no to both those questions. No, I did not really understand what he did. That was a hard learning curve when I was thrown into it. And no, we never had those conversations because I think he was relatively young and healthy at that time. And I was just starting out in my career, what I had gone to school for. And, it was never a conversation that was had at that point.
And was your mom involved in any capacity in the company?
No, she was not involved in any capacity. She had her own business. She was a marketing expert. So she was not involved at all. So it was solely my dad's company. And like I said, he was relatively young. We would not have thought that, there was going to be a need to ever take over. We just take good health for granted, don't we?
We do, and we, we don't plan in a lot of cases until it's too late, right? We're more reactive, and that kind of goes across the board, that we're more reactive than proactive on just about everything. So
Exactly. So
fast
that's what
forward,
happened.
so fast forward, your dad's sick, you're on mat leave because you got lots of time because the new baby with another one at home is really, you got oodles of time. Anyway, you're thrown into this. Tell me about that whole process. Like how did that work?
Well, it was pretty stressful to say the least. The best thing about it is my dad already had a good team in place in his office. So I'll never forget the day I had to go in and talk to them and say, and I downplayed everything, of course, right? It's like, like he was on life support, but I'm saying, yeah, he's going to be fine, whatever. So I went in and I very quickly earned the trust of his existing team that he had in there running the day-to-day work for him. And that was critical. If he had been a solopreneur or didn't have people working with him, it would have been a lot more difficult. So it was just earning the trust of those people that were already there, getting to know them, supporting them, and telling them basically, just keep doing what you're doing. The only thing you have to tell me is how much I have to pay you to keep doing what you're doing, because I had no idea of what people were being paid. It's just like, tell me what you need me
Mhm.
to do. And I was there to support them. And they were with me for a very long time afterwards. So yeah, so it was just supporting the people that were already there.
So two things come to mind is processes, and we'll talk about that in a second, but earning the trust. So I think to myself, okay, so here's this daughter who pops in,
Yeah.
who we know nothing about, who's probably younger or the same age as some of the employees. So how do you earn the respect when you're plopped in a situation like that?
You know what? That was a thing I had to be very careful about. And I didn't really understand how important that was at the time because we're just reacting. But it was just being there for them, letting them take the lead, letting them know that I was there to support them, and just having real honest conversations that their job was safe, that I needed them to support me. And because we only thought this was going to be temporary too, right? Like
Right.
he was, so that was the thing, right? We didn't know how long this was going to go on for. So it was wise for me to be very positive and just earn their trust and be there and basically support them in any way that I could because I needed them.
Right. And how old was your dad when this happened?
He would have been in his 50s when this
So,
happened.
how long had he had the business at that point?
At that point, we incorporated in 1974. So it was about 1994. So he'd already had the business. Well, he was well into it for 20 years when I got involved. I've been involved for the last 30. So he ran it for the first 20. I've been running it for the last 30
So,
years.
okay, so you jump in there, you've taken over this role to keep this company afloat and keep things going, and you've got the support of the employees. Did you have policies and procedures? Did you have handbooks to help you guide this?
No, there was nothing like that at all. Tammy, there was absolutely nothing. I had to trust the people that were working with him, working for him to guide me on what they did, why they did it, how they did it. And then I went into the administrative role, basically just letting them do their jobs. I went into the administrative role of starting to document that stuff. And okay, so and you have to be careful when you come in and you're the daughter of a family member because they could be threatened. I didn't want them to feel threatened at all
Mhm.
because I needed them, as I said, more than they needed me at that point. I was just a person who could pay them. But yeah, it's a delicate dance and you have to earn their trust and respect and yeah, be very supportive of them.
So, how long did it take for you to, get your feet under you? Like, and I guess I should go back and say, how long during this process before your father passed?
So, okay, so it was quite a few years after that. So I was on mat leave. I got involved for the first year, helping out. He was getting better. He was starting to tell me stuff. So we kind of did that process for a year. where he was starting to get better. Because that was key, because I did have that little bit of time with him to help give me information and explain the why, because we all need to know, like, why are we doing this?
Right.
So that was about a year that I had to work with him when he finally got better, and then his team as well.
And so what's the first thing you did? So you think it took you a year to get your feet underneath you, having talked to your dad and being able to have that
Yeah.
help and support. And what's the first thing then you did once you actually got your feet under you and felt confident? What's the first thing you did with the company?
The first thing I did was, I think I worked with his team to help me with this, because remember, they're the people who are knowledgeable. And then I was afraid that, then we started documenting processes. Then we started coming up with a manual, how to do this and how to do that. And it's funny because I'm working with someone now, and we are still working on that documentation, because as our products change, as the world changes, as the industry changes, it's becomes a very important thing. So it's critical that every business has some kind of document procedure in place, especially if you're a small business. That was one of the very, very first things we did. And Tammy, that's ongoing to this day.
Yeah,
We're
and you know
continuing
what?
to evolve.
That's super important. I stress that with our clients as well, because if you're a first generation family business, regardless of how old the business is, whether it's 10, 20, 30 years old, a lot of the information is in our heads. And
So
we don't document it. But if you want the best value for your business to sell it, for example, you need to have that. If you want to merge, you need to have that documentation. If you want to transition it, you need that documentation, because you're going to get the best value and the most success if someone can walk in and it run its own. You're very fortunate to actually have your dad to be able to, lean on for information, because what if you
yeah,
hadn't?
I know. I mean, it would have been tougher, although I still would have made a go of it because I had his team.
Right.
But mind you, I didn't get that same amount of history, like the why, because it's all about the why, right? Why
Mhm.
do we do what we do every day? So it was
Right.
important that I was able to get that information from him. And I think what else he passed on to was that entrepreneurial spirit, which I've always been very much an entrepreneur, although I had a job before I took over Britton Management Profiles. And I was like an employee. I was very much an entrepreneur. So I think that mindset is what I was from both my parents, because my mother also had her own business. So the family was entrepreneurs all around. So I think I grew up in an entrepreneurial household. So Tammy, I think that made it a little bit easier as well.
Yeah. Now, interesting, you had two family businesses. You had your dad's family business and your mom's family business. I mean, ideally, we don't call them family businesses when they're first gens, but you
Yeah,
had two
exactly.
businesses, two business parents that had their own
Yes.
companies. So you were thrust into your dad's business because of health. What happened with your mom's business?
She just then over the years that just kind of wind down, and she didn't pursue that anymore. She had a marketing research company, which was great. Because when I was a teenager, I used to have the job of working for her and doing her market research studies, which
Right.
allowed me to, go and talk to different people. It was fun. It was a great job. I got to travel around Canada when I was a teenager doing that as a part-time job.
Fun. Now, when you look back at that, do you think your mom could have done things differently as a family business or a potential business to either transition, to sell, to bring on the right people? I mean, like, what do you think could have been done differently? Or did you think everything was, okay, that's just the evolution of that type of industry?
It's hard to say without having that conversation with her. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to, but I don't think at that point that was her goal. I think it was just something, as I said, I've had two entrepreneurial parents, and I
Mhm.
think it was just something that she enjoyed doing. While being a homemaker at that point too, in the 60s, that was an important role, to be a homemaker of your house.
Yep.
So she wasn't as committed, and it wasn't as big of a project, shall we say,
Mhm.
as when my father founded his company, Britton Management Profiles. It was a little different. Expectations were different.
Yeah, and it's true because again, even when I started working in the 80s, I mean, I was
It
one
was.
of a few women working. A lot were still homemakers, but I find it fascinating because you've got two family businesses or potential family businesses, and all the hard work is done in the early years. And it's sort of disappointing to hear that it just, you let it sort of die on the vine, and you took a step back, as opposed to all the hard work and the clients and the building of the career to let it just go away as opposed to being able to sell it. So that's a disappointment. But I guess this is why the stats are the way they are, that only 30% of family businesses actually make it to a second gen. Because again, the options are you sell it, whether that be to employees or to third party, you transition it to your family members, or you just let it go. Just let it die on the vine. So that's interesting to see that you've got,
Yes.
two elements within the same family. So anyway, you jump in, you take over, and what made you sort of stay? What made you stay in this company for 30
Think,
years?
yeah, well, I think I realized prior to this, I'd been an employee. I had a job. We kind of joke about having a job, right? It's kind of like just over broke, you have this
Yeah.
job, right?
Yeah.
I always had an entrepreneurial mindset. And because now I was in a situation where I had young children, I wanted to have flexibility. And because of my previous job, I had to travel a lot for work. Well, I could not imagine what that was going to be like going back to my job with two kids, and then having to be traveling and be gone for a long period of time on projects. So I think that was kind of the tipping point. I thought this was a lifestyle change. This could be a lifestyle change for me. I can, get rid of the job that I loved until that point, and I still keep in touch with that group. We're still very close. That whole group has been 30 years since we've all worked together, but there's a group of us that still do because it was a very important part of my life. But I needed to have the flexibility and the freedom. I mean, okay, I got to watch the word freedom, because when you're a business owner, you don't
There's
necessarily
no
have
freedom.
freedom.
It's a 24/7 job.
It is, but I guess freedom to make decisions and make things work the way that I wanted them to work, and make decisions. I mean, that was the key thing of being able to take something and be able to grow it and take risks and take chances and not have to ask permission.
Right. And I just want to go back to the fact that, we talked about when your dad started the business, it was really, reference checking for companies, background checking that, you can't do in the same way today, which could be the death of some industries, right? And some industries just kind of go away because, of evolution. What do you think has led to the success of this company for 40 years?
A lot of it has been hard work and commitment to an industry, but a lot of it has also been world events and how things have changed. So, for instance, an example of that, Tammy, was, we were going along, our name was getting out there, the brand was building, 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 and I've always been key on adding new services. And I think our big tipping point was 9/11. That was probably the biggest tipping point in terms of the business. I remember, after literally that dust settled from 9/11, wondering what is going to happen now to the world, to my business. I figured I might not even have the business now. We didn't know what we didn't know in those days, but that changed the business and took it this way, because again, 9/11 was when we all lost trust in people, and nobody did criminal record checks before 9/11. And then I thought, oh, one of our clients, I was talking to them, it's like, now I'm a little bit nervous about who we hire. And it's like, yeah, okay, so how can we help you with that? And then it's like, oh, can you do criminal record checks? Well, we couldn't. It took a little while to get that process going because nobody did that in those days.
Right.
Now, that's what we probably do the most of. And again, that was an opportunity, as sad as it was at that time when 9/11 hit, that those were, it was events like that sort of like took it and changed the world, that we realized there was a need to solve a problem
Hmm.
now, and what can we do differently. So that's how we started to evolve from just being an investigative reference checking to adding all of these products and services on that we do today.
So
That's how we've grown.
And that's sort of that entrepreneurial spirit, right? Because it's
Yeah,
either you have to grow, pivot, evolve, or you just
yeah,
kind of wither away on the vine, right? Which happens a lot, right?
yes.
And again, it depends on your age and stage of life too. If you've got the energy to refocus and to retool and to, take a different direction. But tell me a little bit about, I think this is fascinating business. So not only are you second gen, and that's an interesting story, but I'm very interested in the work you do and who are your clients and who should be looking at, including credit checks, criminal checks, education checks, like all of these things. Because now, and tell me if I'm wrong, but I mean, with AI and with all the availability, you can sort of doctor information. And, so who should be hiring? Who should be looking at your services?
Well, typically we work with a lot of, mostly HR, human resources, people who are involved in the recruitment process or staffing agencies. Those are
Okay.
the types of people who come to us, staffing agencies, HR. We do a lot of work in the staffing industry, but large companies will come to us and they're doing a lot of hiring and they can't do a number of these checks on their own. So they outsource a lot of what they do to make sure that the person who they're hiring is who they say they are. We become the person who they outsource that to. So, Tammy, how we do that is really through partnerships. Again, we have a relationship with the police services department to allow us to do that. We have partners to do credit checks, employment, education verifications. A lot of this stuff we also do in-house. A number of the verifications we do in-house. But I wouldn't have been able to do it if I didn't have a strong supporting cast. And being involved in my industry, the background screening industry, being on the board for Canada for them, that gives me access to having a strong supporting cast of people who I'm going to need to help me do what I do. We can't do it alone, Tammy. We can't do these things alone. And the bigger your network of trusted people that you can trust and rely on is
Right.
critical. That's how I kind of grew things, was
Mm-hmm.
through.
So if you're not a large company, you're a family business, small to medium size. So again, family businesses can be any size. I'm not saying they're small. There's some very large family businesses. But again, if you're first and second generation who we deal with, you don't have a lot of these checks and balances in place. So how difficult is it or how expensive is it for people to, again, depending on the role within the company, just to call you and say, hey, Marty, can you do this? Is this one off? Can you hire someone to say, I'm hire somebody and they're in the you're going to be in the finance department and just want to check to make sure everything is good. Is that worth a call to you?
Absolutely. We're more of a boutique firm. We don't want to be the huge global background screening company. We do partner with some of those large global companies to give us some additional support that we'll need. But I don't want to be that company that, if there's a problem, I want one of our clients to be able to reach me. We have a nice operations team here in the office that support them. But I still take pride in being that front line. Any of our clients can call me. I love having chats with them to give it that boutique feel, I think. And more importantly, if there's a problem, they can pick up the phone and call me. And that to me is very important. I don't want to lose that part of the business.
Yeah, yeah,
I
absolutely.
don't. I don't.
So at what stage do you hire you? Is it when you're down to like two or three candidates, when you have the final candidate? Like when do you start to do this screening process?
A lot of clients vary greatly. A lot of them usually they're about midway through, they're getting a lot of candidates. They want to start interviewing, which candidates they want to have come in. They may start at that point doing some of the background checks to see, well, before I interview this person, let's make sure that they have their education credentials. Let's make sure that they don't have a criminal record check. Those things are fairly quick and easy and inexpensive to do. So a lot of companies will do that kind of in the earlier stages. Some will wait till the final stages when they're getting ready to make a final offer. But I've seen so many of them wait that long to make that, okay, we got, Johnny and Jane, we're ready to go. We got two candidates. And then, it comes back that there's a problem with both of them. And then they have to start the whole process all over again.
Mm-hmm.
So we recommend our clients kind of start at midway. Give us the candidates that you're really interested in, and at least let us run the criminal check, the education verification, because my God, the education verification is like
Well,
an
it's on the
inexpensive
news.
chat.
Like,
Yeah,
that's on the news all the time, right? Someone
yeah,
has been holding themselves out as this or that, and turns out
yeah.
they never were, which is kind of interesting. But
I
um,
know.
I think
It's
this is
crazy.
I think this is so fascinating because we all run into problems, and I think today with AI and the internet, I think there's so much more prevalent than it could be in previous years because it was harder to duplicate something or a diploma or something like that. I think this is really cool.
And
Um,
you know what's important with that now? Becoming more aware of and doing is identity verification, Tammy. So I want to hire you and I want to make sure you are who you say you are. That's what we do. Our client would order the identity verification. You go through the check. You would, take a selfie with your cell phone. You would upload your ID. And now we're matching to make sure that, A, you're a person. because that's kind of important today,
Yeah.
and that you
Yeah.
are actually Tammy, that you are who you say you are. So identity verification has kind of become something that we're doing more after COVID started again, right? It's like,
Mm.
okay, now we're hiring remotely. How do we know Tammy's
Yes.
Tammy?
That's true, right? Because remote is such a bigger issue today than it was prior to COVID, right? And you don't
Absolutely
sometimes you
is.
don't actually see people. I've heard stories. I had a client who was part of a larger company who hired again, when you're part of a larger company, the right hand doesn't necessarily talk to the left hand. And
That's a
ended
problem.
up, yeah, the ended up that the person had been hired for like a month before they realized that they'd never logged on. They'd been paying them for a month. They'd never logged on. They'd never been to an event. It's like, oh my goodness. So I just think it's so funny because when you hire somebody, there's always somebody else who's in charge of something, right? And so you assume things are being done. So I thought that was just fascinating. But
Yeah,
anyway, I want to talk
absolutely.
about, and I think this is fascinating what you do, and I do recommend that um, clients do look at checking prior to hiring, particularly in leadership roles. I think is really key. Um, but I want to know about what your succession plan is now. So you've been through, being thrown into this industry, and it worked out great because you've been here for 30 years. But what is your next steps? What is your sort of plan for succession?
Good question, Tammy. And I'm still working through that. So I don't have a definitive answer at this point. Because I have adult children who are very successful. But first of all, I need to have a purpose. I enjoy what I do. I can't see me retiring. Like I'm not going to retire, go down to Florida and
Right.
stay on the golf course every day. That's not in my DNA. I just couldn't do that. So I'm not planning to retire anytime soon. I would like to just, possibly, there may be an interest of my children later. I do think it's good for families to have the younger generation go out and learn the ropes, go out and learn your own stuff and then perhaps come back later because otherwise they don't really experience real life sometimes if they're
Right.
just involved
Right.
in a family business from the get-go. They have a security that sometimes you shouldn't have.
Right. Well, and one of the things that, of course, our mission and vision is to keep family businesses in the family, although that
Yeah,
doesn't always happen, and it shouldn't necessarily always happen. But one of the education pieces we're very keen on is understanding the three circle model, which is the difference between the family, the business, and the ownership. And businesses can stay around because you're second gen. I mean, how great would it be to transition to third? But you don't actually have to be involved in the day-to-day operations to transfer it to Gen 3, provided
that's
you
true.
have a board and what you want to do. So really it's coming together as a family, and I'm giving you my piece of advice here, which is bringing the family
Appreciate
together and
that.
having that conversation to say, look, this is a 50-year-old company here. And the groundwork's been done, the policies and processes are here. We can hire third party to manage this and still keep it in the family, but you don't have to work on a day-to-day basis. Or if
Well,
we do decide to sell it, what do we do with the liquidity that happens, and how do we want to manage that? So I do think what's really important is to have those conversations, because I think you can have a plan in place, but it doesn't actually have to be triggered until an event occurs, whether it's death, retirement, or something. But to say to your kids, this is what happens in the event that, I pass away today, that this is what the plan is. Or, I am planning to retire in 10 years, or I'm never planning to retire. But here's what I want to do is I want to step back a little bit. I don't want to be involved in working, 60 hours a week like I'm doing now. And I use that as example because I sold my family business, but I started a new company. But it's sort of, a shoulder of the existing company because now I'm helping my family businesses transition to the next gen or transition to, a stranger, a competitor. It's my role is say, what does the succession look like? And again, it changes over time. But I also think as the first, in your case, second gen, a lot of times you were thrown into it and you didn't have a plan. And the key is to have a plan. You can change it as your children evolve or the next gen is rising. So who is here to take the helm, and I think that's important to talk about with the next gen so that they understand what's happening. Just like in your dad's case, it wasn't planned for. Thankfully, he was around for some time to help and guide you through that
yes.
transition.
That's a valid point. And I mean, I do I did feel it was important that my children go out and get jobs
Mhm.
and learn, like get knocked around a bit and realize, what it's like. But I mean, and I still feel that I'm going to be quite involved for a while. But at some point, we have taken care of some of the legal parts of it now, like they do have signing authority. So we're kind of slowly thinking about, okay, so what happens if something did happen to me? Who has signing authority? So we have at least started those conversations.
Mhm.
Not to say that my children will never be involved in the business, but I think it's really important that they have a time to forge their own path for a
Right.
couple of years and figure that out. But we have taken care of some of the legals in that regard. Yeah, if something happens, like when something happened to my dad the first time, it's like, okay, well,
Right. Well,
this
and
kind of
there's a
runs.
difference, between being in the business and
Yeah,
taking
yes,
their
and
skill
on.
sets and using them as a board position, right?
Yeah,
And hiring an outsider, a
yes.
CEO to run the company. But that's again is a sort of a family decision to say, is this a business that we want to continue? It's 50 years old. I'd like to see this be 100 years old. Maybe your kids will take over, or maybe they're
Yeah.
never going to take over, but it's always going to be an asset, within the family in a trust or something. My focus with families is to say there are other options here. Like, let's take
Yeah.
a look at them all before you make a decision. Um, but the other thing from a succession plan, do you have an internal succession plan? If you weren't able to come to work tomorrow, is there somebody within your organization that could step in?
Yes, you know what that is, that has always been an important part. We have worked to align our strategic plan, our goals, identifying the key roles of the people in the office. We've been fortunate enough to have the same accounting team for many, many years, so they know, exactly what they have to do. We've been fortunate in that regard. Everybody has defined roles, responsibilities. Everything is well documented. We do have great guides and all that stuff. We have been very good at doing all of that
Good.
information. And that's been a lot of work and it's
Hmm.
continues to evolve and be a lot of work, but
Absolutely.
it's good work. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? Like it's
Yes.
that good work that we have to do. So we've been pretty diligent because I learned the lesson when my father got sick suddenly and we had no clue
Yeah.
what we were
Yeah.
going to do. Where was his bank? Like none of that information. So
Right.
that I have made sure that that wouldn't happen to me and my family and my employees, the people on my team. So everybody is well aware of,
Yeah.
who does what and things could run. We do have other people who have signing authority. Like I said, both of our children have signing authority in case something were to happen to my husband and I. And yeah, having a process and procedures document in place, like everything is well documented. And we've been fortunate to have the same accounting firm forever, and they know
Yeah.
who has signing
The
authority as
history.
well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's been important too, Tammy.
Well, this has been a great conversation, but I want to end with the three pieces of advice you'd give to other businesses to sort of avoid or be proactive in their succession planning.
Three pieces of advice. You got to be
Hmm.
ready because stuff can happen. So make sure you are ready, have a plan, have some kind of, okay, we don't have it nailed right down, but you need to have some kind of plan. You need to have some kind of procedures and processes in place, which I just talked about. And overall, just making sure everybody's on the same page where information is, because I did have that information. I know how challenging it was being transparent and making sure everything is looked after as best you can.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for coming on the show today and sharing your story about, your dad's illness and how you ended up in the business. But the success of the fact that, you took this business and evolved it over the years based on what you had to do to stay alive and using your entrepreneurial spirit. So thank you very much for coming in today. I really appreciate it. If you like this episode, subscribe to the Business of Family podcast on your favorite listening platform. You can also find Blue Roots on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. On the next show, I'll be back with another amazing guest who will inspire you with their family business insights. Until then, take care and keep it in the family. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered legal, tax, investment, or insurance advice. Before acting on any advice, please contact your personal or company advisors.